Hello and welcome to the studio. I'm Lea Sellers and we're going to be discussing on this panel generative technologies and the future of employee experience. I'm joined by Tim Carmichael of Chalhoub Group, Ian Cohen of Acacium Group, and Leon Gauman of Elsewhen, and Ari Cohen of Macquarie Group. First, I want to ask you, can I start with you, Ari? What makes the launch of ChatGPT and other generative AI so intriguing in the context of employee experience?
That's a great question. I think when ChatGPT was launched, AI really came into the mainstream. So I think people had been following AI and talking about AI for, since the 50s. Wasn't Paul McCartney who coined the term, it was John McCarthy or John Lennon, being at Abbey Road. But people have been talking about AI since then, and people have been talking about the Turing test since then. And what's interesting is people aren't talking about whether ChatGPT has passed the Turing test. I think most people have just assumed it has. And we're entering this new age, this time of generative AI that's really been discussed for decades, and it feels very much like we are here now.
It is, and it's been less than a year, really, since it came out. Leon, can I ask you, what difference do you think it will make in the context of employee experience?
We believe that it's going to change everything. So, as Ari said, bringing this technology into the foreground, making it popular and accessible is the real change. The Transformer paper that describes how large language models work exists since 2017. This technology existed in different parts of organizations, deep, doing kind of behind the scenes stuff. And OpenAI put an interface on top of it and released it. So I think this wave of building interfaces, building products, and solving customer-centered user problems with this technology is the next big wave, and this is why it's very exciting, I think.
It is very exciting. Is it going to change everything, Ian?
I think it is going to change everything, but I think it will bring that change in a different time scale to the ones we're thinking about. I mean, to Leon's point, the internet became accessible when the World Wide Web was put on the top of the internet. The abundance of accessibility that has come through creating a easy to use, I just want to ask a question interface to some complex technology. That's actually for me the killer thing that is driving the adoption and why it's moving so quickly. And as professionals, what we need to understand is, how do we harness that usability? How do we focus it and shape it so that it becomes additive and value creating in our businesses? Because it's all the people have latched onto it because, I can just ask it a question, and that's the simplest user interface you've got. Tell me something.
Thank you. So Tim, easy question: how do we harness it for employee experience?
So it's all about making life easier for your employees. That's what this is for, and that's the reason that what has been spoken about so far, it's taken off in the last year. Because for the first time, stuff that would have taken ages, and it might have been wrapped up in a process, or it might have been a bit opaque, or it might have been difficult to access, an employee just goes straight to the answer. Make my life easier. So it might be, in my line of work, I'm a chief data officer. Some of my team are using it to do their coding for them, the data scientists. Others are using it to check their coding. It's just, my life is now easier. I can accelerate stuff. I can do more than I could do before, and I'm likely to do it better. I think, though, word of caution, what's really important is that we understand that it's not a panacea, it's not perfect. I like to think of it as the salesman who's 100% confident but 80% right.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about coding and how you're already using it, because so much of generative AI is about questions and how we're going to use it and how we're going to harness it, and we don't know yet. Has anybody else got any practical uses so far, particularly in regard to employees?
I would say probably the trend I'm seeing and many of us are seeing is generally companies are looking at setting up a secure type of ChatGPT environment. It might not be based on OpenAI's particular technology. If you're in a large corporate, there's going to be concerns about the data security. We saw, Italy shut down ChatGPT because of privacy, essentially, and they didn't believe it was compliant with GDPR. And so now you can actually toggle it, so it doesn't keep your data. But at any large corporate, it's not trivial to actually set up a secure internal generative AI portal. For me, that's the starting point. It just gives people a general place to improve productivity in any sort of way.
I think security is a very good point. I think Italy did reverse that decision, didn't they? They
After
were just
the toggle.
scared at the beginning. Yeah,
That was after the toggle was released.
Okay.
So actually Italy's decision has made ChatGPT more secure for all of us.
Yeah.
So, and I think, good on GDPR for that.
Any practical steps, Leon, that you are taking already or you have in the pipeline?
Well, first of all, I just want to add to Ari's point. You see this technology at use immediately. So we use it internally to deliver value to our clients. Everybody uses it. But also what's interesting is that you see people that normally don't use technology. This has percolated that. So for example, teachers picked it up.
Yeah.
Lots of teachers are using it because they just can't ignore it. It saves their time. And we have clients asking us to go beyond that. What can you do with this technology? How can you change processes? How you can redesign work with this technology in mind? Because again, we're at the very first stage of kind of finding fire, So there's this interface, we interact with it, we type into it, but we can go a lot further. And I think the first steps, again, interestingly, even non-technologists are asking for this technology. For example, we have conversations with CFOs, which normally don't really, their kind of technology has to come and convince them.
Yes.
It's the other way around, because they're looking for, in this day and age, they're looking for efficiencies. They're interested to see how you can cut down steps, how can you be more effective. So I think one of the ways to pick this up and start with is, as always with technology, to start from the business problem or the user problem and then see how it can be applied and experiment with it. We find that quite incumbent and traditional organizations that for a long time did not engage with technology, like insurers, are looking into this, which is, I think, is very interesting.
Yeah. So it's still at the experimental stage with you at the moment.
It's not even a year.
No, exactly.
But the speed is enormous. So think about the internet, the World Wide Web, Mozilla, and how long that came into enterprise and B2B. This technology already launching with enterprise in mind. They're thinking about the business user.
Yeah.
So that's
so fast.
It's very different. Yeah.
And I think with that, to build on that, I think the ubiquity and the simplicity of ChatGPT, which is only one element of generative technologies that we're talking about, but the ubiquity and simplicity of it is a double-edged sword. There are some fundamental truths around how people implement technology and deploy technologies in their organizations for benefit. And I think it behooves us to remember those fundamental truths. To Ari's point, of course, you have to make a secure and a safe environment for your employees to work, because that's the foundational blocks. Everybody wants to try this out, so I don't really want sensitive corporate data in OpenAI. So I need to, as a business technologist, create a safe and secure environment where all parts of the business can experiment and learn. So that's one side. The other side is far more important, I believe, which is, again, the fundamentals. And we've been talking about this since the days of data science and Hadoop, and let's serendipitously connect this stuff together in the hope that we find something interesting. If you want to be something, you go and do things to get there. Very few organizations are able to just run around doing things, hoping they'll become something else. So if you want to become an employee-engaged organization, if you want to become an organization that uses technologies like this to improve the employee experience, to reduce waste, to add efficiency, to create productivity, You overtly set out to do those things that will get you to that outcome. And so in my organization, and I've chatted to a few CIOs in this community, there are lots of people doing very targeted and very focused experiments with generative AI, picking specific territories to test, specific hypotheses about their businesses that they can learn from. And if you take that structured approach, you can do two things. Make it secure and make it safe so people can experiment, but be very clear on what you want to be as a result of these technologies, because it will fundamentally change your business.
Yeah.
May I add to that? Because I think actually there's a certain power and potential in a slightly more hybrid approach than that. You're quite right to get the secure foundations right in. Beyond that, you're going to really struggle if you don't set up those foundations and those AI safeguards and put those in place. And you're quite right that you should focus on what are the business outcomes you're trying to enable that would improve your employee experience in this particular case. But I think there's also a third case, which is about allowing people the freedom, that safe environment in which they can experiment at the edge. Because there's no monopoly on wisdom here, and I would love to think that I and maybe the team around me have all the answers to all the questions, but clearly we don't. But there are some really interested and imaginative people out there. So I work in luxury retail, and luxury retail is inhabited by people who are very creative. Give them the tools and they'll find something interesting to do with that. The trick is to put a mechanism in where they can do that without fear, and also you have a mechanism where they can bring that knowledge back, and then you can assimilate. That makes a lot of sense, let's adopt that. That not so much, let's pause on that, and so on. So I think this idea of having a hybrid approach where you have very focused centralized initiatives coupled with experimentation on the edge is quite a powerful combination, providing you can harness the experimentation.
And I think just to come back on that, one of the big powerful elements, of large language models and this notion of training large language models is you can do exactly that. If you can harness the power of your organization and the intellect and information inside your organization so that it can drive the learning of your large language model, you become far more adept at pulling that information in, almost like making it systemic and then pumping it back out. It's why the concept of learning inside generative, so the idea that you can learn and generate, is absolutely fundamental and powerful.
Is there any fear that it could run away with you, that you can't control it, that employees could use it for things that you don't even know they're using it for? Is that a worry?
Yes.
Yes.
It's a huge worry. So one of the things, having had some experience, I can't talk about all the details, but having had some experience with this, is when you release an internal tool, people will make assumptions. So say, for example, you just wrap an open AI API and you give it a little, pre-prompt. You'll find that if you roll that out broadly to thousands of people, they will assume that it's been trained on your company data. They will assume that when it's asking specific questions, it knows what it's talking about. Current LLMs do hallucinate, to Tim's point about quality, and it's very important that when you're creating those customer experiences, internal employee experiences, that the warnings are right up there. This has not been trained on our company data, if that's the case. Please be aware, you might, it's going to sound convincing, it's going to sound like the salesperson, but it's not. So in the data space where I'm from, we've been speaking about data literacy for a few years now. There's an element of AI literacy that needs to be discussed. Maybe it's not the best terminology, but it's definitely AI training and AI user training so that people are equipped to use AI effectively. And I think that there are serious risks there that companies need to manage.
Would you agree with that, Leon, that there are risks and you need training and you need warnings in its use?
I'm a technophile, so I think that there are risks always in using technology, but we usually trump and end up using, and for example, areas from financial services, the amount of time that it took to get financial services on the cloud. They are here, they're on the cloud. We already, the timelines financial services are already looking into this technology. It took like 15 years to get cloud into financial services. So I think we're kind of potentially beyond that point. I 100% also agree with Ari that the experience around it requires additional work to adapt it towards the particular use cases. And for example, with organizational data and the quality of that data, there's different principles around kind of citation and building an experience that explains to the employee or explains to the user where the information is coming from, how to validate, how to step them through the usage of this tool. But these are challenges that I think we can overcome, and I think the opportunity of redesigning work is immense. And we had a presentation previously on the stage about remote working and etc. So work is changing, and I think that this technology will allow a lot of tedious, boring, and jobs that we're not good at as people to be offset to the machine and release us to do work that is actually meaningful, creative, interesting. That's to me the promise.
Well, you bring up another point, which is a lot of people feel that AI will threaten jobs. Is that a fear of employees, Ian?
Is it a fear of employees? Absolutely. Is it a valid fear? Well, we've been fearful of technology since the Industrial Revolution and the spinning jenny. I'm hoping I'm not seeing people running around with sticks trying to break in generative AI. I think that the point is it will fundamentally change the nature of work, and that will throw out a whole raft of societal and cultural challenges that we have to be aware of. If you work in an organisation where the route into work from education was through doing things. So, I don't know if there are any legal people in the audience. If they are, they can shut me down. But one of the ways that in the legal profession people did their first few jobs was to do essentially sort of legal clerk type work. It was work that is actually quite easy to put a process around and therefore put a system around, and AI can and will and is taking those jobs away. Now the question is, what happens to that gap? Mm-hmm. You create a gap between education and work. Work has moved to a higher order system. Education is not outputting people to enter the workplace at that higher order. So it's real, it's a challenge, and it's possibly one of the things that we don't talk enough about, because part of the employee experience was coming to work and learning and interacting with people and developing as an individual. If those tasks, if those things don't exist for you as a person, what happens? So we're at the cusp of great opportunity. I think it's Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility. We're at the cusp of huge opportunity, but we also have to understand as organisations how we are going to adapt and change as a result of it.
I don't think that people are necessarily going to lose jobs to AI, but they may well lose jobs to people who've learned to harness AI, to use that AI to augment, to multiply, and to boost their productivity. Essentially, one is power assisted and one is not, in terms of the way that they do work. And I think that's probably where it's going to be quite binary for how people adopt this and see the use. The point on learning, I think, is a really good point. And the point on opportunity is also a good point. What I'm seeing for the first time, and it's so cool to see for the first time, is business leaders engaging on this. And our colleagues in our business who are not naturally easy bedfellows with technology or all that is underpinning the reality of generative AI are seeing an opportunity themselves. And so what I love is you can tell it's taking on when you're having to gently hold people back. And it's not taking on in the way that, whatever the latest craze of this year is, and we've seen many of them over the last years, This one's different, and this one, as was said right at the beginning, has brought AI to the mainstream, or at least the possibility to the mainstream. And for me, I think that's the most important opportunity to seize here, because then what you're doing is having everyone harness this for the right reasons, in the right way, under the right conditions. And that makes it a multiplier. That makes it an opportunity and less of a threat. Those that want to sit there thinking about their spinning jennies are going to struggle.
I think it's what Ian said. It's ubiquitous and it's very simple. People understand it. That's why they can embrace it. Whereas some technologies, they just think, I don't get that at all. But everybody understands it. It's everywhere in the news and has been for the past 11 months. But you've taught, yes, Lea.
Can I add something to that? So I think it's because the role of design in this was paramount. So the reason that people engage with it is because it was well designed. So for example, the feeling of talking with a machine is completely artificially generated. So, you know, the prompting doesn't work like that. This kind of chat feeling of a person who is talking back to you, that's a very high level of design that feels so natural and now feels like it's always been like that. And this is the first step. So I think we will be so much better now at harnessing this technology because we are so much better at doing design with technology. And this is going to be pushed further and further. So again, you saw last week an announcement that Johnny Ive is going to, you know, drop his studio into working with OpenAI, creating a new device. This, again, the speed that it moves, it's quite staggering. And I think the design and human centricity of how this technology is being applied is baked into the values of the companies that work with it.
It's a good point. I just want to ask anybody in the audience if they have questions. We've talked about security and training, the threats and the opportunities. Does anybody have a question? Yes. Take a mic.
So it's a quick question, and it's to do with, it's very practical, but it's to do with Gen AI etiquette. So I think there's some tools going to hit the market soon that are going to put Gen AI in front of people's email, you know, the ability to generate content and replies, and then we might have Gen AI talking to Gen AI. And I just think it should be really clearly watermarked, and we should have a standard where everything is cited. Otherwise, I'm not quite sure where we're going to be headed with this. So it's just to see whether you guys have adopted anything like that, or whether it should be watermarked, or is it hidden?
It's a huge question, and who's going to watermark it, and how do you enforce it? Etiquette.
I mean, it's a great question, and in an era of, in my background, I spent 10 years in media, so of course I'd have a view on this, of fake news. We can't even watermark the validity of where news has come from. The plugins you talk about, we've already got them. We try them. I haven't seen one yet where I haven't had to edit its output, but that doesn't mean it's not going to come. And when it's plugged into, practical example, when it's plugged into an employee who has a customer engagement type role, and it's improving the productivity of that employee to the extent that they don't have to craft the whole email, they can have all of the corporate messaging in there as a matter of fact generated by the AI, and the context and the sensitivity of it's generated by the AI, and they add the value add, then it's hugely powerful. The idea of an AI bot in an email service talking to another AI bot in another email service kind of sounds like a redundant conversation, but
I think one of the points here is about accountability. If you're the author, assisted or otherwise by an AI to deliver some sort of output, some sort of response, some sort of conversation, then if you're adopting that tool set, you take accountability for it. And that's a tool set that's helping you figure out content. It's just the same as deciding I'm going to dictate this message and have the machine transcribe it rather than using a keyboard myself. You still take accountability for what's being sent or responded. But I think the productivity message that Ian's mentioned is the key one here. It's about basically liberating people to use their brains and not just having to input the basic stuff, Get the basic stuff done automatically, and then let the human do what the human does best, which is think about tone and empathy. Now, I don't know if that means that there's an etiquette rule that we need to put in place. Transparency might help, but actually it's really about accountability of the ultimate author.
I would just add to that and agree with what's been said. I think watermarking, maybe separating watermarking from email, I think watermarking is going to be critical, particularly with image-generated AI. So we're already seeing, I was on YouTube this week, and I saw a deep fake of Elon Musk telling me to buy this app that would make me $1,000 a day. I mean, it does sound like something Elon Musk might say, but I'm pretty sure this particular one was a deep fake. So I think watermarking, and I know Google's working on watermarking on generated images. I think it's super important. Within the email context, for me the main difference is there is a human in the loop. So there's a person verifying and validating, and if it's making communications hard, and if it's make it easier for someone to communicate how they feel with another person, I think that's human-centric, and that's great. If AI is sending messages without humans validating it, I think that's something that needs to be thought about.
Yeah, but we do that today. It's called the automatic reply.
Yes, there's a lot we do already.
There's a lot we do already, and I think I take your point, Ari. It's a really important point that there comes a threshold where you do want to put a human in the loop, but let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater here. We already use predictive text. We already use automated replies in certain circumstances. So how can we harness this to improve things without giving up the accountability or the validation that what is said is what is meant to be said?
I think
the
harness is
automated
the key.
replies are the same every time today. Having one that could be different every time would, of course, be.
I absolutely agree. I think this concept of watermarking is important because I think it was the first Obama election where they said that was the social media election. It was the election where the power of social media drove different behaviours of an electorate. It may not be the 2024 election, it may be the 2025 election in the US, I don't know, but I think someone is going to call that the AI election. Because I think people are going to start harnessing the technology, some with very positive intent, but unexpected consequences, and some, quite frankly, with malevolent intent, with very intended consequences. And this idea of being very clear about the source. And again, going back to to my media days, a journalist was absolutely precious about their source and maintaining their source and the credibility of their source. There is an obligation for us, and there's an obligation for the technology industry to make it easier to spot a deep fake from a real individual, to spot the manipulation of data inside an election versus actually, actual outcomes.
Well, we've got much broader now, and we're talking about bad actors and malevolence, and you can't control that. And also, deepfake is now so good, you can't spot the difference always. Is there any more questions? Yes, this gentleman here.
Just to put a little bit of context first. So I'm talking about sort of mid-sized or larger businesses, multi-site, typically multi-country, typically legacy, especially on the business technology side, but also operating in different ways. So one, AI is definitely here to stay. I would have agreed with you, Tim, 3 months ago, but I think it's going to take a bit longer. And the reason is, one, look at cloud. Still globally in the Western world, only 30% of all hardware is run. It's cloud-based. And two, in the UK, as I understand, only 1 out of 6 businesses have one or more AI sort of domains implemented. But my coming to the question. So if we look at this from a pragmatic, realistic perspective, if we really want to enhance employee and customer experience, yes, of course we should experiment and we should do it safely. But how would you envisage rolling this out? Let's say within the talked about email, sort of how to become more efficient, how to save a lot of time or be better at our communication. Having an idea to having it implemented, let's say across 5,000 staff globally. Two very, very different things. So how do you see your organizations, or what's your advice for any organization to move from the experimental stage, which I 100% support, to actually implementing something that runs globally and creates business value?
We've only got a minute left, so very quickly, and we have talked about some of this.
Can I answer that?
Yes, please.
So
Lea.
I think the opportunity here is to create delightful tools that people pick up and use because they save them time and they make work better for them. And it's a huge step change to enterprise technology today, which a lot of people don't want to use because it's awful. It's a horrible experience. It's something that they're made use. So I think, again, we learned how to do this better. And this is an opportunity to redesign work, really, to build a tool that a person wants to use. Teachers at this embryonic stage of this technology pick it up and use it by themselves. There's people that never use technology that pick it up and use it. So it's a real opportunity, I think, for large organizations to rethink how work is done, how the operational model works. How can we redesign people's jobs to bring the best out of them?
Well, I think it's been a great discussion. We've talked more about opportunities and harnessing AI and ChatGPT and the like. And as somebody said, I think it was you, Tim, liberate people to use their brains. I really like that. But I'd just like to thank the panel, Tim Carmichael, Ian Cohen, Leon Gauman, and Ari Cohen. Thank you, and thank you all very much.